Good morning, health champions. It's Ashley, and we are here for our weekly live training session. It's already Wednesday of the week. Can't believe we're already halfway through. Hopefully, your week's going well. Mine's going pretty great. I've been working away on new projects and things, so I'm excited because I'm getting close to being able to share those with you guys. So, hopefully, your week's going just as well. And that means we're also halfway to the weekend already. So, hopefully, you guys have some good stuff planned. It's been raining where I live every day this week so far, and it's supposed to rain at least the next couple. So I'm hoping that by the weekend it'll be nice, so I can get some time outside. But anyway, let's jump on into today's topic. We're going to be talking about lifelong learning, and so one of the big things, obviously, as far as learning goes, is why do we learn? And that is humans are uniquely gifted in that way. As far as the capacity for learning, creation, and obviously intellectual advancement. When you compare us to obviously most other animals within the animal kingdom, we have this capacity far greater than any other animal. I'm not saying that other animals can't learn, and they do, but not in the same way. And so that's why humans obviously have flourished over the millennia. Um, and cognition is how your brain processes the acquisition of knowledge, and its interpretation of this is of the information is how you obtain your thoughts, your experiences and senses. All those things all combine together to form what we know as our internal dialogue, our internal thought process. And so obviously all this impacts our attention, our memory, our ability to produce and understand language is a big one. Obviously, our problem solving skills, that's a big thing. And then our decision making capabilities. All of these things are as part of our learning process that we just so innately do. We don't even realize it's all going on, underneath the surface there. Uh, so that's a big, big factor is that as humans, we have this unique capability that other animals don't have, and obviously we've capitalized on that, hence why we have made it to the moon, and we've made it down to the depths of the ocean, and we're continuing to push boundaries and learn. So this role of curiosity is super important because it's the joy of exploration. It's that joy of finding something new. That's often the hidden force that drives learning, critical thinking, and reasoning. And so this whole idea of curiosity is absolutely critical because when you think about it, that is when you think about if you're curious about a topic, you're more likely to retain what you're learning for a longer period of time versus when you're in school, you're bored, you don't like something, you might remember something because you have to take a test on it, but if you're not actually interested in the subject, as soon as the test is over, you're going to most likely forget the majority of the things that you learned for that specific test. Versus if you are very interested in a topic, your intellectual curiosity has a huge impact, obviously, on your accomplishments, almost as much as hard work. And this is where, when we're actually focused on, finding out the information that we're seeking, this has a huge, huge impact. And that's why curiosity is so important. And so, despite the old saying, curiosity killed the cat, in this case, curiosity actually helps us a lot. Um, and curiosity has been linked to tolerance in like anxiety provoking situations, obviously producing positive emotions. It increases humor and playfulness. When we're curious and we're more likely to be in a good mood, more likely to find the positives in situations, more likely to be joking and around and all that. And this helps to encourage out of the box thinking. And this is where we come up with new innovative ideas. Um, so to me, this is something when we're curious, we're also going to be more open to other people's viewpoints. And this can bring a whole new sense of enlightenment because the curiosity is that we're not closed off. We're not just focused on what we already currently believe. We're more open to looking at new ways of looking at something. And this helps when you're wanting to have a chance to obviously expand your mind. And this, be able to maybe try something new, maybe try to understand someone better. It's just curiosity is such a key element in our overall everyday life that we shouldn't be taking it for granted or try to squelch it down, essentially. So, and this is the whole idea, is that when you're taking the time to actually learn something new and put it into that process, that you're taking time to actually think about what you currently believe and why you believe that, and how does the new information impact it in any way, if at all. And so this is what's so important, is as far as being open and curious to other thought processes, is it helps us develop and shape our own in ways that if we aren't, would never have happened. Um, so this is why lifelong learning, obviously today's topic, is so important, because if we stop learning when we get out of school, we're closing ourselves off to so many different things, so many potential opportunities in life. And it doesn't have to be, you're studying specific things to help you advance in work, or anything like that. It's more of the concept is your brain is like any other part of your body. Think of your muscles. In order for your muscles to, do what they're supposed to do, you need to exercise them in some way to keep them in shape. Same thing with your brain. You need to exercise your brain to help keep it in shape, help it keep growing. And that's what so many people have the misconception of, is that once we get out of school, our brain stops growing, or, shortly after college. It's like, no, our brains are this hugely dynamic, awesome thing. I mean, when you consider out of any of the organs in our body, the way our brain functions, there's still so much we don't know. But we know that it has this incredible capability to learn over our lifespan. And when you think of people who've, mastered a musical instrument and they didn't start until they were late in life to actually learn how to read music and play that instrument, or learn a new foreign language, or learn a new hobby, whatever it is, that's something that, goes right along in this thought process, that here we are, we have this supercomputer, essentially. That's what our brain is. It's the supercomputer that can learn. And to me, that's something that's so important, is that we continue to challenge our brain. And that's the whole idea of lifelong learning really began about 85 years ago. So it's not overly new, but it's really come to light in recent years as far as like, news media and all that talking about it. And so this is where obviously the idea of lifelong learning, if you're actually looking at the definition, is that it goes beyond formal education. It's not just you're talking in the sense of school. This is above and beyond school, and it can include non-credit classes. A lot of colleges offer that, especially for adults who are interested in a specific topic. Um, and you can include educational travel. To me, that's one of the best parts about traveling, is learning about the area I'm traveling to. Not saying I'm not obviously there to relax, but it's more of the idea of, by traveling to somewhere, I'm a huge fan of history. So to me, I like to go to places where there's a lot of old stuff, if you will. And so by going to these places, you can learn so much about, this, to me, this forms this connection with generations before, because I'm learning about them, how they lived, and that expands my thought process, thinking of how far we've come as far as the human race, is being able to do all these innovative technologies that even 200 years ago they would have looked at you like you had four heads if you told them, yeah, in 200 years from now we're going to be able to do this. And then, so, and I can only imagine them 200 years from now what we're going to be able to do. um, Other big things that can help with lifelong learning are things like community service or volunteering. And one of the awesome things about either one of these is that by doing that, not only are you giving back and helping others learn, but you're also going to learn as well, because obviously we all have our own unique experiences. And by connecting with others, we get to share those experiences, which means we get to learn. So that's something that, to me, the whole idea of lifelong learning is so helpful in that way, is because we're constantly seeking to expand our brain, essentially. And to me, don't get me wrong, traditional education is important in many senses. There's many basic concepts of life that we learn in that process. However, it doesn't always give us the answers we seek when we're looking for things that are outside that very narrow space. So to me, your success in lifelong learning is going to depend on your motivation. What is it that you're driving you to learn something? And obviously how much of that you continue to do throughout your life, and then how are you applying that knowledge to your life? Because obviously when we apply things, it sticks better. And so that's something, like the whole concept of learning a musical instrument. When we're interested in that, rather than being told as a kid, oh, you're going to learn an instrument, but as an adult, when we're like, okay, I want to learn how to do the guitar, and you've never picked up guitar before, you have no idea how to read music, and you sit down, and because you're actually interested in it, and the way obviously musical notes are comprised and all this other stuff, and how music can tell a story, and that helps us to process certain things differently when we're in different ways than you would even expect when other things when you're not playing the guitar. So, the big thing when we're talking about lifelong learning, as far as your motivation goes, is that it has to come from more than just your desire for knowledge and self improvement. You need to make it feel like it's not a requirement. That's the big thing. When we're kids and we're in school, we feel required to learn certain things. As adults, obviously, we have the unique opportunity because we're no longer required to. So, and that's a huge difference. That as far as the motivation component. Um, so that's something to keep in mind, is what's driving you to learn, and then obviously how are you going to take the stuff you learn and actually be able to use it. And that's a big factor, is when we can see how we can use it, or somehow some way we're actually surprised, oh hey, because I learned how to play the guitar, I now know how to do this. Or once you learn how to read music and you've mastered the guitar, you want to go play the piano or the drums, you can do that too. um, so when we're talking about types of lifelong learning, there's actually several. So formal is obviously, it takes place as part of a scheduled, monitored sequence of learning with other learners, and this is sort of like a college course. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, many colleges have courses that are non-credit that you can take just to learn about a subject. Um, and this isn't a plug for them, but I do love their stuff. The Great Courses Company, where they have a wide variety of topics that you can get either on DVD, you can get via audio, and just learn about something. And to me, that's one of the best things, is I love to have that type of stuff. I'll do the same thing with books. As you can see behind me right here, a stack of books to read. And each one, has a specific focus. What is it that I'm interested in learning about right now? And so that's a big thing. As far as formal education, it follows a specific outline that you're doing usually with other people. Informal is sort of like what I'm doing with the books, is the idea of you're reading, you're watching a YouTube series, um, you're doing things trial and error. You're learning on your own without a defined structure that you're following along with someone else, essentially. And this is sort of along the same line of self-directed. So informal self-directed is the most common type of lifelong learning that most people do. And self-directed means that obviously you're controlling the path and the pace of your learning. If you've got 5 minutes a day to read something, and you obviously are choosing to read a specific thing, then that's super important, because that's how you continue to expand your thought process. Um, so self-directed, sometimes it can mean though that if you're following like a YouTube video, obviously there it's maybe at the pace of what's going on in the video, but if you watch the one video and then you watch the next one the next day or whenever you have time, that is still self-directed. Obviously, you have professional, and this is when it's something related usually to your type of work, as far as professional development, job training, skill acquisition, something along those lines. So sometimes, obviously, companies have certain requirements that you must do yearly in order to be able to meet their professional development standard that they have. Versus personal, which is done usually, obviously, outside the workspace, and that is something that you're passionate about, something you're interested in. And keep in mind here, personal can be done formally or informally. So that's something that's usually, personal, informal, self-directed is the big one that we are focusing on today, is how to increase doing that. And then indirect is when you learn something that you haven't even planned or knowing about. So this is sort of the knowledge you gain in everyday life, the stuff that, you're doing something and all of a sudden you learn something new, and it opens you up to a whole new possibility. So to me, sometimes that's the best because it's unexpected, so you have this immediate appreciation for, wow, I just learned something new today. And so I think that's something that's super key. So when we are talking about the importance of lifelong learning, there's several factors here, obviously. One is obviously, given how technology is today, and it's changing by the moment, especially when it comes to the workplace. It's important to be able to continue to learn in this situation to obviously remain current and relevant to your job, but also um, as you're continuing to learn personally, why it's so important is because things are changing, things are happening that are new and different. And by staying up to date on that information, then you might be coming up with different solutions to things that you wouldn't have thought of if you weren't aware of what's going on and staying current. Um, so this is something that's super, super important. But that's why when we're pursuing passions outside of work, it also helps us to become more well-rounded. Because we're able to talk on many subject matters and have, you know, a thought process that includes things that if we hadn't looked at and studied, that we wouldn't be able to actually communicate on. And sometimes something we learn in one area helps us figure out a problem in another area. So that's, to me, it's that whole concept of being able to problem solve and all of that that's so key, that if we aren't learning, then we're not able to get to. Um, so to me, another big factor as parents, if you have kids at home, by continuing to do lifelong learning, you're demonstrating to them the importance of obviously learning and how that above and beyond school, that you can go ahead and continue to do that. And by showing them that, it usually gives them that idea, okay, yes, I'm continuing to learn in school, learning is important, but it's not just at school. I can do other things, and this is where if they have an interest of whatever it is, that they want to build model rockets. Obviously, they don't teach that at school, so maybe there's a model rocket club, or maybe there's something else that they're interested in. And the big thing here, as far as benefits go with lifelong learning, there's a lot. And obviously, the big one is it's usually enjoyable. That's why we're doing it. But it boosts your confidence because you've learned something and you feel more confident in yourself. Both of these together usually increase, obviously, your happiness level. When you're more confident and you're enjoying what you're doing, you're typically happier. Um, and so, as you continue to have that personal development, all of this together increases your quality of life because of the fact that you're learning, you're applying new concepts, you're happier, all of that. Um, and a big thing, obviously, when we are happier and doing things we enjoy, we're typically less stressed. So, if you're feeling stressed from work or whatever else is going on in your life, by trying to learn something new, you're going to be focusing your attention on that, which is going to help take your mind off things, and then B, because you're going to get enjoyment out of it, you're going to feel less stressed afterwards. So it's a twofold thing. So that's why I think something as far as learning is so important. um, and then another big factor is it usually can help you sleep, because obviously when we're working our mind, just like when you work your muscles, it's going to get tired. So when it gets tired, you're going to want to go to sleep. So this is where obviously, physical exercise is great because it makes you physically tired. Mental exercise, when you're exercising your brain, makes you mentally tired. And so that's where if you don't do this on a regular basis, sometimes, you're awake at night because your brain's just not tired, but maybe physically you are. Um, and then when you are learning, you're increasing your overall competence in life because obviously you're learning more things. You know more things, you can do more things. And so this allows you to function not only more effectively, but more efficiently because you find new ways to do things that, therefore, that hopefully take up less of your time to do certain aspects, and therefore you're freeing up your time to do other things, hopefully more learning. Um, but this is, and a big factor is when people are lifelong learners, they typically have better health because obviously part of what they're learning about is ways to have healthier lifestyles. A lot of people focus on that when they're learning. And this doesn't mean, that you're going to go run a triathlon. If you are, that's great if that's your thing. But it's more of the idea that you're focusing on taking in information and applying it. And most people do that is when it comes to their health because it's important. And so when you're a lifelong learner, that's usually one of the areas that they focus on is focusing on health. Um, and a big factor when another benefit is you usually become sharper and clearer and you're able to function at a higher level because of the idea that you're challenging your brain. And when you're challenging yourself, that eventually the outcome is that when you think of you're challenging your muscles, if you're working out, that when you become better at what you're doing, you're sharper, you're more physically fit. So in this way, you're more cognitively fit. Your brain's sharper. Um, so it's important to talk about here is what they're finding in research is that as we are learning new tasks, not only is the part of the brain that's associated with that particular task becoming strengthened, but the whole brain itself in that surrounding area is becoming strengthened. So the neural connections in that area are strengthening overall, and that's something that I think is super exciting because that means you're not just increasing your brain development in one area, you're doing it across the space of your brain, and obviously the more things you learn across a wide spectrum, you're increasing your overall brain power, and that's something that I think is so, to me it's awesome. I know I'm a tad bit of a nerd when it comes to brain and cognitive health, because to me our brain is so amazing that just stuff like that excites me. Another big factor here, and this should be a big one for most people, is that if you are continuing to learn, it can slow the physical process of Alzheimer's disease, which for obviously many people that can be concerned, especially if you have a family history of that. So by continuing to learn, we're decreasing our chances of having Alzheimer's progress either at all or rapidly, and it's because our brain is constantly having to make these new connections, which obviously as we age it naturally starts to deteriorate. So by continuing to learn, we're helping make more of those connections. So um, as far as a few examples go, if you're trying to develop a new skill, it can be something like sewing if you've never done that, cooking, like programming if you want to try computer programming, or public speaking. For some people, I know that's a big no because they don't like public speaking, but if that's you want to give it a try, that's definitely going to push you above and beyond your comfort zone, right? Self-taught study can be learning a new language. Obviously, there's many programs out there that can help with that, and you can research a topic of interest just because you want to. You can subscribe to a podcast of something that you've not learned before. As far as sports, you could learn a new sport or activity. You could join martial arts. You could obviously learn to exercise, learn to ski. If whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing physically, and initially it might not feel comfortable, and that's something that I think is so key, is constantly challenging yourself to learn something physically as well, because you're incorporating your physical movement of your body, which also helps trigger different parts of your brain. Um, Learn to use new technology, such as different software applications or new devices. I know that it's a big thing as far as elderly individuals who never had a computer. All of a sudden, they get a computer, they learn how to use it, and that's great because it's encouraging the brain to develop in new ways. And then acquiring new knowledge, such as I talked about before, taking a course online or in the classroom that it follows a specific pattern. And that's something that I think is so key, is being able to do that. So there are several key steps to becoming an effective learner, and it can be applied to any type, and it's called the master technique. And so I'm going to go briefly over that here in the next few minutes that we've got left, so that way I don't take up too much of your day. But the master technique stands for motivation, acquire, search, trigger, examine, and reflect. So with motivation, obviously, it requires self-motivation to have lifelong learning. So you need to have a positive outlook towards learning in general, because if you're struggling to see the point of learning, then you're not going to do well. So you need to have, motivated interest in whatever it is you're trying to learn about. And as I said before, it can't feel like it's a requirement. You have to want to be able to do that. As far as acquiring, effective learning obviously requires you acquire information either through reading, listening, observing, experimenting, obviously experience. So the trick is to acquire relevant information that you find meaningful, that's going to help you develop knowledge and skill. So then we get down to search. So this is where we're trying to think through where you're going to get the information from, right? So we have to ask ourselves a lot of these questions when we're doing it. How are you going to apply what you're learning to your life? And what has this experience taught myself about myself? And so, this is where we're attaching that personal meaning to what it is that we're finding. So first we have to be motivated to find it. Then we actually have to acquire the information. Then we're now figuring out, well, how are we actually using that information personally in our everyday life? And then as far as the trigger. Means that you're not going to remember every single thing that you ever hear, read, listen to, anything. Our body just has to process so much stimuli going on in our environment that there's no way we can ever remember every single thing that's going on. Our brain chooses to selectively focus on specific things. And so, what we're here as far as the trigger is that you have to develop certain triggers for retaining what you view as important information. So great examples of this are you're taking notes. Obviously, you're practicing. If you're doing something either activity-wise, you can talk about it with other individuals. That's a great way to do it. And also that you're also learning as far as what you're doing as far as that connection. You can experiment with new ideas or skills. And so the trigger here is you want something that's going to make you remember it, whatever that is. If you're writing it down, if it's repeating it by talking about it with others. I mean, they have the whole concept of see one, do one, teach one. And that's the idea. If you're trying to learn something, first you have to see it, then you have to do it, and then if you're actually trying to teach it to someone else, you're more likely to remember it than if you just did the first two on there together. So next, after we get to the point of finding that thing that's going to help us remember, now we have to examine. And this means that you're examining the knowledge that you've acquired to help reinforce it in your mind. And that way you're trying to remember what obviously you've learned, so that way you can actually use it. So you want to be open-minded, questioning in a way to help you further your understanding, and obviously be open to further new information. And this is where when we're trying to learn stuff, questions in this case are not a bad thing. It's because you're constantly trying to learn. And so talking to others, this is a great one, especially if you're using it as your trigger, is because it helps you look at things in a different way, because obviously other people have different perspectives. So by talking to others, it helps you examine your own perception and maybe have a more thorough understanding of the subject. Or come up with new concepts that you didn't necessarily know about because you didn't think about it on your own. So once we get done with that, then we have the last stage, which is the reflection stage. And this means that you're actually going back and reflecting on what you learned, thinking about how and why, and how you felt about it. Because obviously we are emotional beings, so tying emotion into what we learn is absolutely critical for being able to remember it. And then big thing here is if you've made a mistake or something, learn from it. And that's because we often learn more from our mistakes than if from successes, because when we don't do something correctly the first time, obviously we have to go back and do it again. And this means that for some reason our brain just didn't get it the first time, so here's another opportunity to get it. um, so to me, this is something that is absolutely important over the long haul of your life, is applying this technique to whatever you're trying to do. And that way, you're actually taking in the information and you're actually able to use that information in a way that's helpful. Um, so obviously, one key step is developing a to learn list, similar to to-do list, but it contains all the items you'd like to learn more about. And obviously this changes as you learn new things, or maybe you decide, yeah, I really don't need to know about that, but I want to try learning more about this. So having a to learn list is absolutely something I view as essential to being able to continue this lifelong learning journey, if you will. Um, a lot of people are worried about having enough time to learn. Obviously, we're all busy, but the key thing here is you have to make it a priority. Which means you obviously have to have good time management skills, because if your activity requires you to practice or to spend time doing something every week or every day, you're going to have the time to be able to do that. And there's creative ways to accomplish this. So if you think about all the time, if you drive to and from work, or if you ride the subway or a bus or something to and from work, think about all the time that you're sitting waiting. You can listen to audiobooks, you can listen to podcasts, you can, if you're not driving, you can read actual books, or if you're waiting for an appointment. And, most people, while they're waiting, they actually are on social media or the internet. And instead of doing that, imagine taking that time and actually allocating it to learning something. And that's, one of the statistics is that on average, Americans spend 23 hours on social media or texting a week. Think about that. In a week, that's 23 hours. That's a whole day's worth of hours that you've now used on social media and texting, which obviously not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, to think of even if you took half that time and you could learn something new, imagine how quickly you could learn different things. Um, and so to me, that's something that's, it's we have to be aware of how our time is structured. So even if it's just 15 minutes a day, imagine what you could learn in 15 minutes a day, every day, 7 days a week. That's a lot of stuff. If and depending on your reading speed, most people can actually finish a new book every 2 weeks if they only read 15 minutes a day. That's a lot of books in a year, right? I mean, so to me, and this is something that I think is super important, is some words of advice from Elon Musk. Obviously, we all know who he is. He's got mastered industries in a diverse range of products: software, engineer, transportation, and aerospace. And he has these three secrets, if you will, that power his leadership concept. You have to become an expert generalist, which means you don't need to know everything, single little thing about one particular thing. Know a lot about something, but also know a lot about a lot of things. Um, so then you have to improve your learning transfer skills, which means how do you take what you learned in one area and apply it to somewhere else in your life? And then view knowledge as sort of like a tree. Because obviously our brains are sort of like that. They're all interconnected, interwoven. So how we apply what we've learned, as far as it's all connected in there somehow. And this is where obviously things can get very, very creative. So to me, this is something that really stood out, is because we have to be able to take that information that we've learned and apply it, and it's, obviously if your specific area of specialty for like your job or something like that is very technical, you're going to be an expert in that field. That doesn't mean though that you can't learn a lot about a lot of other things. So this is what I encourage you guys to do. Find some time each day, whether it's 15 minutes. I mean, 15 minutes a day doesn't seem like a lot, so let's strive for 15 minutes a day to learn something new. Um, my personal favorite time to learn stuff is because I do like to exercise. Rather than just putting in music and tuning out to music, I listen to audiobooks, generally audiobooks, sometimes a podcast. That the way I'm constantly learning something, and it helps keep my brain engaged when I'm exercising, and oftentimes I forget that I'm even exercising. So I encourage you guys to spend at least 15 minutes a day, learn something new today, and drop in the chat what it is that you guys are going to do, or the comments below. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you guys. Tell me what it is that you've chosen to learn. And until next time, next week, you guys have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you guys soon.